guess game. The questions every wrestling fan has to have the answer to. So the question number 1, Mr. Gray, how did you get into professional wrestling?
The way I got into professional wrestling, it goes back to the old days of Saturday morning. I would go to my grandmother's house in the late 80s, and we would hang out and we would watch the early days of WCW tapings and NWA tapings, and the very, very tail ends of Georgia Championship Wrestling in that 88, 89, 90 range.
How old are you?
38 years old.
God damn, bro, you look 28. You look my age.
Yeah, you look great.
I appreciate the shit out of that, man.
Yeah, like whatever shampoo you use, whatever you eat down there in Tennessee, like, don't stop.
Fried chicken and biscuits and like that's it, man.
I dead ass thought you were my age, so incredible. All right, your favorite wrestler currently and your favorite wrestler of all time.
My favorite wrestler of all time is Mick Foley.
Nice. Long Island boy.
Amazing.
I say there's a point in wrestling history where it's not necessarily about titles. It's not necessarily about in-ring work, and it's not necessarily about like mic skills. Foley is one of those guys where he's not anybody's number one in any of those key components as to what makes a great wrestler a great wrestler.
Yep.
But to me, Foley changed and revolutionized how people wrestled. And I think that's what makes him so important. I read his first book, Have a Nice Day, A Tale of Blood and Sweat Socks, when I was a wee kid. I'm talking like early teenagers. And from that moment on, I was a Foley guy. The Three Faces of the Foley, anything about it. But also in reverse, for the opposite reasons, my current favorite wrestler is Seth Rollins. And I recently wrote an article that said Seth Rollins was the Babe Ruth of professional baseball. He's one of those guys. He might strike out every time, every third time he comes up to bat, and Seth Rollins might take an L, 40% of his matches. But then you're guaranteed a home run and a grand slam, 50% of the time or whatever it is. And that's the way I feel about Seth Rollins. He can chew nothing but L's, just one right after another, and he's still just over all the time.
Seth Rollins was this close to having the worker's curse put on him, like where he's just so lucky and talented and deserves the fact that he's so charismatic and he can just change his character time after time after time. That's like he doesn't really need wins. Yeah, point. Like he can eat that L after L after L. He had the most losses out of like anyone relevant on TV last year, and we still put him in our top 5 wrestlers of the year.
Absolutely.
That's a skill. That's crazy.
Random statistic I put into that article talking about Seth was his lifetime career average. He's a 500 hitter, meaning he's lost as many matches as he's won in his entire career, and he's held a title almost 50% of the time. For active days in the ring, he's held a title. And think about, he went 4 years in WWE without a title reign.
Yeah,
like it's just crazy to think about like the career and trajectory he's had, from Tyler Black in Ring of Honor to being the architect Seth Rollins today.
I do love that you said Mick Foley. Mick Foley may not be number 1 in the ring, may not be number 1 in the mic, but he is number 1 in our hearts.
Absolutely. Bless that man.
The first Daniel Bryan, Mick Foley.
Yeah, that's absolutely correct. All right, let's continue on, Will. Both Wills.
All right. The greatest match of all time.
Oh, that's a great question. I would say my favorite match of all time, and what I consider to be the greatest match of all time, is Ricky the Dragon Steamboat and Macho Man at WrestleMania. WrestleMania.
Great
3.
choice.
Great choice.
The reasons why is it wasn't the biggest story. You know what I mean? Hogan and Andre was always going to be the bigger story. But what made this match so important was, once again, it changed how wrestling matches were called. Because up until that point, wrestling matches, 98.7% of them were called in the ring. The guys were going out. They were running, a match, getting time cues, but that was it. Steamboat and Savage said, we're not going to be able to be the biggest match of the night because of the story, but what we're going to do is perfect. So they sat down and they memorized every single movement in the match, from rolling out of the ring to moving Elizabeth around. The build, Fretz is in the chat talking about how Steamboat got injured and then George the Animal went after Miss Elizabeth, and then Macho Man went after George the Animal. Then Steamboat came back to save him, and it built to Mania. It was just chef's kiss, perfect match, perfect story, perfect build.
The original show stealer.
Yeah, Chef's Kiss for real, because as Wilbur Gray kind of talked about, they planned everything out, and if you've ever listened to or heard Steamboat speak about that match, and Macho Man in and of himself, Macho Man was so meticulous with this match that it was literally like a numbered list of every move, every sequence that they were going to do, and he forced Steamboat to memorize it before WrestleMania 3. So they would practice like what is step 1, what is step 2, what is step 3 weeks leading into WrestleMania 3. It's absurd. It's absolutely absurd.
Agreed.
Yeah.
Next question. If you were a wrestler, what would your finisher be? Describe it and give it a name.
If I were a professional wrestler and I were to use a finisher, it would be the traditional Jerry Lawler pile driver.
Nice. Still effective to this day.
You would think about the fact that if you look at where wrestling was at that point, you still, in the late 70s, there were still territories. There were 22 Vince McMahons at that point in wrestling. Yeah. I say that a lot. But the thing that made the Lawler pile driver so special was it had became such a protected finisher that the Tennessee Gaming Commission made it illegal to use in a match to build the story and the lore behind it. So I think in true Memphis wrestling style as a Tennessee boy, I would use that Jerry Lawler just very straight stand up and drop pile driver. And that's what I would call it. It would just be called Lawler's pile driver. Just simple and pure and just to the point as to what it was, because if I used it, it meant business.
Dude, I love how there was just no hesitation. You knew the question was coming. You gotta have given the question beforehand. So,
no, I didn't give him the question this time.
That's the hardest question of the first guest game, because someone's no one's ever thought about for the most part. It's if I was wrestling, what would my finisher be? What would I call it? Fuck, that's a good question. Yeah. And I go back with mine all the time. I want to a flapjack Batista bomb.
Fretzel in the chat says Foley's pile driver, though. The thing I liked about Foley's pile driver, he did the draping pullover style where he'd
pull your pants up,
go back, and he would grab your trunks and pull your trunks back with you. Foley's was really unique. Lawler's, he would stand straight up and pick you up vertical.
He would hold them for a while a little bit too.
Exactly. It was like a vertical position, and then he would drop into that really powerful sitting pile driver. It was just a work of art, man. I love Jerry Lawler's pile driver.
Yeah, here's a bonus question for you. So we know your finisher, but what's your wrestling name?
Oh, it would be El Pollo Loco. I would put my luchador mask on.
Nice.
And I would wrestle in a Sriracha t-shirt and some gray sweatpants and some Chuck Taylors, and I would be the ridiculous wannabe El Generico. I would be the jobber that would take all the bumps just to make the crowds laugh, shake hands, kiss babies, and put the stars over.
Unbelievable.
I might have to make you in 2K23 as just a jobber talent.
Just everything's the most basic things about me, but for some reason you can't help but love me.
I never thought we would get a poor man's El Generico, but I think you have just created it.
That works for me. That works for me. No complaints here. Next question. How did you find the podcast, the Kings of the Rings podcast?
It wasn't directly me this time, I don't think.
Yeah, 9 times out of 10, twice on Sunday, it's Ricky. Yeah. But please.
We have overlapping circles. There's a few of them. We talked about one previously with Kyle from Apron Pop.
Yeah.
We've crossed paths with Matt from Smacking It Raw.
Oh, love those guys.
Love that guy. Yeah, the Smacking It Raw guys are a lot of fun.
So there were some circles that overlapped, and I reached out to Mr. Fretz about coming on. I think if the order was right, I actually booked Mr. Fretz for my WrestleMania Night 1 Fallout show before Night 2 started. Before
you did.
Ricky actually came on the show with me. Because Ricky came on a few weeks ago, after the fact. So I met Mr. Fretz first, then met Ricky. He came on the show. Then Fretz came on for the Mania Night 1 Fallout on Sunday. So I got on the Wrestle Addicts circle, so to speak, by 2 different points, through Mr. Fretz and through Ricky both.
Yeah, pretty much. We had a great conversation about the European title and the greatest European champion of all time, D'Lo Brown.
For sure.
Who's better than D'Lo? Don't say Bulldog.
Brown.
Don't say British Bulldog.
I was about to say British Bulldogs. Actually, no, not gonna lie. I watched that match the other night, Bulldog versus Owen for the first European Championship match.
Mm-hmm.
Watch it. It's a phenomenal match that takes place in Germany of all places. So,
As it should.
As it should. So yeah, I'm gonna say Bulldog. Fuck you.
Whatever. D'Lo Brown's better.
Speaking of fucking you, the last question of the first guess game, the most important question.
Yes.
Mr. Gray, are you Team Slack or are you Team Fuck You Slack?
Answer instinctively. We're not going to explain why we're asking this question.
I'm going to go with Team Fuck You
There we
Slack
go.
on instinct alone.
Everyone
because
does.
For some reason, I'm chaotic good in my nature. So that could be a good or a bad thing either way. So I'm going to go with Fuck You Slack.
That is the absolutely correct answer. Just to give you some context.
Sorry, Slack. One day someone who actually knows you isn't going to tell you to fuck off.